and welcome to Conversations with Terence. This is a podcast about Terence McKenna. This is episode 3, Terence versus Science. I have improved my audio a lot from the first few episodes I made, so thank you for sticking with me. And if you enjoy this content, please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. A little appreciation goes a long way. And thank you for listening. So we're talking about science today because Terence McKenna studied lots of scientific topics, and he talked about this a lot in his lectures and his books. He especially seemed to study botany and environmental science, but I would say he knew more than your average person did about physics and chemistry and things like that. He had a few of his own, what I would call hypotheses about the universe, how it operates, things like that. Pretty big things to have your own little theories about. And he also had some issues that he took with ideas espoused by scientists. Now, I will say at the outset of this episode that I am not an expert in any scientific field, so I'm not going to be fact-checking any of Terence McKenna's ideas. I'm just going to be laying them out for you to listen to and consider. To start us off, I'm going to read a quote from one of Terence's books, The Invisible Landscape. He wrote, "Clearly, nature appears to our common sense to have purpose and value. It seems to evolve from simple to more complex, from primitive to more advanced, from less conscious to more conscious. Indeed, it appears to have direction, and it seems to have purpose, which guides in that direction. Yet we are asked by science, in the face of all evidence, all reason, and all intuition, to regard nature as purposeless, meaningless, and valueless." So, one issue Terence had with science had to do with his assertion that scientific conclusions seem to go against our own intuitions about the world. I don't actually think everyone would agree that science asks us to regard nature as purposeless, meaningless, and valueless, but that was Terence's view. Another issue Terence took with science had to do with the assumptions of materialism, the idea that the material external world is real. He talked a lot about the implications of quantum physics, things like singularities and black holes. In his view, these things appear more like magic than like science, but I will let him explain further. This is a quote from a lecture called Dreaming Awake at the End of Time.
Matter is not lacking in magic. Matter is magic. I mean, so when you hear these people like David Dennett and all these talk show materialists running around, these people haven't gotten the news that's coming out of quantum physics. I mean, you see, there's a problem, or let me describe to you the state of play here. The way science works is science respects fidelity of theory to experimental results. What really thrills a scientist is when you have a theory that makes a prediction down to 5 or 6 decimal points, and then you perform an experiment and it's spot on down to 5 or 6 decimal points, and then everybody involved in what's going on has extremely high confidence that they're on the right track. Well, now, only one science is ever that good. Physics, macrophysics. Chemistry, it's good, but it's not that good. Ecology, biology, demography, these are pretty loose. They play with numbers, but it's a fig leaf. And by the time you get to sociology or something like that, I mean, these clowns have just snuck under the tent and should actually be shown the door and put back outside with the card readers. So for several hundred years, since, let's say, Galileo and serious physics, this is how science has been. It's been a pyramid of envy directed toward the paradigmatic science, which was physics, and which could produce this incredible congruence of theory and experimental data. Well, so then physics, of course, charges forward deeper into matter, asking deeper questions. Well, once you pass below the level of the electron, it's like suddenly, it's like smoking DMT or something. Absolute madness breaks out, where before you had these wonderful theories and they were feeding back this data. Now suddenly you have backward flowing time. You have particles which appear magically on one side of an energy barrier without apparently crossing through it. You have non-locality, which seems to imply that every particle that exists is somehow magically connected with every other particle. We now have quantum teleportation, we have black holes, we have singularities. And don't be fooled, folks. What is a singularity? It's just a place where you agree that the rules are canceled because you don't know what the hell else to do. And it's fine, you know. It used to be in physics that they had one singularity. It was called the Big Bang. And so you say, well, one singularity, essentially what science is saying is give us one free miracle, and then we can run it from there. But the theory of special relativity then introduced the concept of black holes. And of course, black holes are enormous gravitational masses, so massive that neither light nor information can leave them. And what do black holes have at the center of them? Well, a singularity. Well, how many black holes are there in the universe? 10 high 14. That's a lot of singularities if you're trying to produce a theory without singularities. I mean, essentially, that's an admission of total intellectual defeat. My God, if there are 10 high 14 singularities, you're not even doing science. You just might as well be, you know, channeling Atlantis or something.
So it sounds to me like Terence believed that these scientific facts were essentially true. He just claimed that at the heart of it, the conclusions that should be drawn from quantum physics would support the quote-unquote non-rational factions. But I will let him go on to explain further in that same lecture what he means by that.
It troubles me because I think this stuff is rich. That physics is feeding back, and that ultimately a model of consciousness will come out of studying the deeper levels of the behavior of matter. But the conclusions are all going to support the non-scientific, non-rational factions. In other words, Bell non-locality is real. All matter in the universe is in contact with all other matter through some kind of higher space based on their original connectivity. Quantum teleportation is a possibility. These violations, backward flowing time, and violations of rational casuistry are all real. In other words, science, meaning physics at this point, prosecuted its agenda of deconstructing nature to the point where it let loose the elves of madness, paradox, contradiction, and peculiarity, and that can now never be put back. I mean, the dirty little secret is that at bedrock, the universe is more like a DMT flash than it is like an 18th century garden party, as we were previously assured by the practitioners of science. So I think that's enough ranting on that subject.
So, Terence believed that matter behaves more like the way that the mind behaves, and further claimed that a model of consciousness will come out of studying matter, but the conclusions will support the non-rational factions. I wish I could ask him how exactly he thought that would unfold. How can science support non-scientific conclusions? I guess that would be a paradox, not impossible, but I still have trouble wrapping my head around this argument. Another issue Terence had with science was the fact that science only trusts sober observation. So a person's experiences cannot be used to draw conclusions or understand anything true about how the world really works if that person was intoxicated during that experience. In our culture, most people would probably not even think to question it. But really, how or why can we say for certain that a person's drugged experiences are essentially meaningless, that they can't tell us anything about the world around us? I think some people would at least concede that those experiences can tell us a great deal about how the human mind works, And of course, as explained, the thing is that in Terence's view, he didn't really like the idea of neatly separating the human mind from the matter outside of it. It seems that he believed the two to be connected in essential ways that science ignores. And he talked about this issue of science distancing itself from intoxication in his talk, Psychedelics Before and After History. I will play that clip now.
Because of the work of people like Hoffman and Wasson and Metzner and Leary and earlier people, Lewin and others, the 20th century has come full circle. We have dug so deep into the toy box of matter that we have actually come upon the residence of the God or the residence of the mystery, and it cannot now be denied. This is, I believe, a lot of what the cultural struggle over hallucinogens and the impact of plant-induced hallucinations is about. It is that science cannot continue as usual in the face of this phenomenon. It is what the parapsychologists have been seeking, but have not the courage to proclaim, because so strong is the bias against drugs in this culture that automatically anything having to do with drugs is ruled out of bounds in the realm of evidence, precluding forever, in my mind, the validation of these phenomena. So-called psychic phenomena are an everyday occurrence where hallucinogenic drugs are taken. But where hallucinogenic drugs are not taken, these things must be sought by the most tortuous and excruciating kinds of methods, you know, the flipping of cards and that sort of thing. And I don't want to dump on Whitley because I don't know the man, but I read his book. I was amused, those of you who are aware of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, he takes great pains to say that he never uses drugs. He even has an appendix in the back of his book, which is a polygraph session, where he insisted that he be asked the question, do you use drugs? Well, to my mind, it's no wonder the poor man can't understand what is happening to him. Without a symbiotic relationship to the biodynamic, God-laden constituents in the exterior natural environment, the unaided human mind is almost certain to fail in its effort to assimilate the mystery of being. Because throughout the historical and prehistorical career of human beings, this is how understanding was achieved. And, I bring great wrath upon myself by suggesting that even the most respected methods of spiritual transformation, such as yoga and mantrayana and that sort of thing, are in fact efforts to mimic the intoxication of plants without committing the heinous act of ingestion, you see.
It's definitely a shame that Terence McKenna is not alive today to see the sort of scientific renaissance that's currently happening in regards to studies on psychedelics. However, those studies tend to look at the impact that those substances can have on people's mental and physical health, which is sort of outside of the realm of what he's been talking about in these clips. Those studies don't aim to conclude anything scientific or even really anything philosophical about the nature of the universe itself based on people's experiences. Fairly understandably, of course, because how exactly would you even study that in a scientific way? And that's an issue, in my view, that Terence never, to me, adequately addressed. He doesn't really explain how exactly he'd recommend using the scientific process in support of his claims. He's not recommending any specific, experiments or anything like that. Finally, Terence's own scientific hypothesis, if you can really call it that, is his novelty theory, the idea that the universe is evolving from simple to more complex. I would say this is about tied with his quote-unquote stoned ape theory as being among his most well-known and most central ideas. He wrote an entire book about novelty theory called The Invisible Landscape, and let me tell you before you buy it, it's mostly just math. And so, just something to know before you purchase it. But Terence's novelty theory strongly ties into his claims and ideas about climate change, which I discussed in episode 1. So Terence fully believed that we were and are headed towards the end of the world as we know it. And he recognized the destruction of the planet in that process, but really he seemed to believe that what was happening was a direct result of what he called this novelty theory. So strap in, folks, because this is a long quote. Like I said, novelty theory is one of Terence's most central assertions. It came up in a lot of lectures and books, so I did not feel comfortable cutting it down into a short soundbite. This quote is also from the lecture Dreaming Awake at the End of Time.
Science, which I recently praised, has overlooked in very important aspects of reality that you don't need an atom smasher or a DNA sequencer, or a probe to Ganymede to register. And what do I mean by that? Science has overlooked two aspects of nature that as you sit here, I believe you can hear my case and that you will find in my favor. Here's what it is. The first thing which science has not taken on board is the fact that as you get nearer and nearer the moment in time that we call the present, things become more and more complicated. Now that may seem like a trivial statement, but there's no reason for the universe to work like that. Why does the universe go from simple to complicated? Why do you get, at first, moments after the Big Bang, an ocean of free electrons at such a state of temperature and energy that no molecular bonds can form? Atomic systems can't even form because the bond strength is overwhelmed by the thermal energy in the system. Then it cools down and atoms condense, a more complicated thing than electrons by orders of magnitude. Further cooling, further nuclear cooking of the most primitive elements, hydrogen and helium, in gravitationally aggregated masses called stars, cooks out the heavier elements. They emerge. They were never seen before until fusion began to occur in these hydrogen masses. And these fusion processes cook out iron, sulfur, carbon. Bingo! Carbon, molecules. Now, an order of magnitude in their complexity greater than atoms, as atoms are compared to electrons. And then, and I'm compressing 13 billion years of emergence here into 30 seconds, then out of the molecular soup you get long-chain polymers. Out of the long-chain polymers you get molecular transcription systems, i.e. prebiotic stuff. Out of that you get non-nucleated DNA. Out of that nucleated DNA. Out of that membranes, organelles, organisms, higher organisms, differentiation of tissue, our dear selves, culture, language, technology, and the eschaton. Now, why this is so obvious, leaving out the eschaton, if you like, but all the rest of it is totally self-apparent. Why doesn't science take that on board as a major problem in the description of nature, the emergence of complexity? Well, you ask a scientist, they say, well, you see, these are separate domains of nature. How atoms become molecules has nothing to do with how animals become human beings. This is bullshit. This is just some kind of compartmentalized thinking where you don't want to come to grips with the overarching metaphors that are working on various levels. The advent of the understanding of the fractal ordering of nature now makes it clear that voting patterns in Orange County, distribution of anemones on the Great Barrier Reef, and the cratering of Europa all follow the same power laws. So that's the first thing which science has staring in the face and has never taken on board. Now, I said there were two things. The second thing is related to the first. A double shot of espresso. You're really getting your money's worth here. The second thing which science has taken on board, has refused to take on board, is that this process of complexification that I just described to you, as you approach the place in time called the present, happens faster and faster. That was not necessarily implied by the first observation. The first observation was simply that there was a process which was moving from simple to complex. Now we have the concept of a process which is ever accelerating as it moves from the simple to the complex. So more and more happens as you approach the present. And since these processes have been running since the Big Bang, there is no argument to be entertained that they will reverse themselves suddenly. No, they're not going to reverse themselves after 13 billion years. Duh. But the implication of that, carried to its ultimate extreme, leads to a conclusion most people find too wild to entertain. If the universe is evolving deeper and deeper into complexity, faster and faster, and if now in a human lifetime we can see a small portion of this curve, it no longer appears flat to us because of our nearness in relation, you understand what I'm saying? That we can actually discern the curve. And so that means, I believe, that by extrapolating this process, we should then logically conclude that we are very near, relative to the life of the universe, we are very near to the place where this ramping up of complexity will become so excruciatingly rapid that more change will happen in a single week than happened in the previous 13 billion years. And that then there will come a moment where more will happen in a single minute than happened in the previous 13 billion. And then a moment will come when more will happen in 6.55 times 10 to the 23rd erg seconds. More will happen than has happened. And people say, well, but that's crazy. I mean, what kind of universe is that? Well, wait a minute. What's so crazy about this? Let's look at what the competition is peddling. What the competition would have you believe is that the universe sprang from nothing in a single moment for no reason.
One of the conclusions that Terence draws from all of this is the importance of human beings as essentially the most complicated being in existence, and in fact the most complicated, really, thing in existence. But I'll let him complete that thought from that same lecture.
Who are we in my story? Well, first let me tell you, who are we in science's story? We are nobody. We are lucky to be here. We are a cosmic accident. We exist on an ordinary star at the edge of a typical galaxy in an ordinary part of space and time. And essentially, our existence is without meaning, or you have to perform one of those existential pate douze where you confer meaning, or, one of these postmodern soft shoes. But if I'm right, that the universe has an appetite for novelty, then we are the apple of its eye. Suddenly, cosmic purpose is restored to us. We left the center of the cosmic stage in the 13th century and haven't been back since. But this idea says, no, people matter. You are the cutting edge of a 13 billion year old process of defining novelty. Your acts matter. Your thoughts matter. Your purpose to add to the complexity.
Personally, I am tempted to believe Terence in his assertion here for mostly emotional reasons. Existing as the living embodiment of the universe's divine plan sounds pretty nice. So that's all for today's installment. Like I said, I'm not going to fact check any of these things. I don't think a lot of Terence McKenna's ideas are really fact checkable, if you know what I mean. And again, if you like this series, please like, share, subscribe, comment. I will continue making episodes in proportion to how well they are received. So if you like this, let me know that you like it. It's definitely fun for me to make. I think one of the things that's interesting about Terence McKenna was that he was so multidisciplinary, but it's fun to sort of pick a discipline and try to pull what he said about that discipline from disparate lectures. And so that's really my goal here. Moving forward, I will be choosing topics and focusing in on those topics because his lectures didn't really focus on specific topics. And, that was the joy and the wonder of those lectures. So again, thank you for listening. See you next time.